At last the minstrel came to an end, and a long sigh-like wind in pine trees was heard from the assembled ghosts. Then the king spoke, and his deep voice echoed through his silent land. "Go back to the light of day," he said. "Go quickly, while my monsters are stilled by your song. Climb up the steep road to daylight, and never once turn back. The spirit of Eurydice shall follow, but if you look around at her, she will return to me." Orpheus turned and strode from the hall of Hades, and the flocks of following ghosts made way for him to pass. In vain he searched their ranks for a sight of his lost Eurydice. In vain he listened for the faintest sound behind. The barge of Charon sank to the very gunwales beneath his weight, but no following passenger pressed it lower down. The way from the land of Hades to the upper world is long and hard, far easier to descend than climb. It was dark and misty, full of strange shapes and noises, yet in many places merely black and silent as the tomb. Here Orpheus would stop and listen, but nothing moved behind him. For all he could hear, he was utterly alone. And then he would wonder if the pitiless Hades were deceiving him. Suppose he came up to the light again, and Eurydice was not there. Once he had charmed the ferrymen and the dreadful monsters, but now they had heard his song. The second time, his spell would be less powerful. He could never go again. Perhaps he had lost Eurydice by his readiness to believe. Every step he took, some instinct told him that he was going farther from his bride. He toiled up the path in reluctance and despair, stopping, listening, sighing, taking a few slow steps until the dark thinned out into grayness. Up ahead, a speck of light showed clearly the entrance to the cavern. At that final moment, Orpheus could bear no more. To go out into the light of day without his love seemed to him impossible. Before he had quite ascended, there was still a moment in which he could go back. Quick in the grayness, he turned and saw a dim shade at his heels, as indistinct as the gray mist behind her. But still he could see the look of sadness on her face as he sprung forward, saying, "Eurydice!" and threw his arms about her. The shade dissolved in the circle of his arms like smoke. A little whisper seemed to say, "Farewell," as she scattered into mist and was gone. The unfortunate lover hastened back again down the steep, dark path, but all was in vain. This time the ghostly ferryman was deaf to his prayers. The very wildness of his mood made it impossible for him to attain the beauty of his former music. At last his despair was so great that he could not sing at all. For 7 days he sat huddled together on the gray mud banks, listening to the wailing of the terrible river. The flitting ghosts shrank back in a wide circle from the living man, but he paid them no attention. Only he sat with his eyes on Charon, his ears ringing with the dreadful noise of sticks. Orpheus arose at last and stumbled back along the steep road he knew so well by now. When he came up to earth again, his song was pitiful but more beautiful than ever. Even the nightingale, who mourned all night long, would hush her voice to listen as Orpheus sat in some hidden place, singing of his lost Eurydice. Men and women he could bear no longer, and when they came to hear him, he drove them away. At last, the women of Thrace, maddened by Dionysus and infuriated by Orpheus's contempt, fell upon him and killed him. It is said that as the body was swept down the river Eurydice, the dead lips still moved faintly, and the rocks echoed for the last time, "Eurydice," but the poet's eager spirit was already far down the familiar path. In the daffodil meadows he met the shade of Eurydice, and there they walked together. Or, where the path is narrow, the shade of Orpheus goes ahead and looks back at his love.